Hello. Wow, it's really quiet in here. So I'm here today to talk about what could be considered a problem in our industry, but I think is also a big opportunity. And people don't often, I think, like to talk about it, the iOS first launching phenomenon. But as I happen to be currently free, I guess, in the job market, there's no chance of me getting fired, so here I am to talk to you today. So before I get started, I wanted to say there are some cute illustrations in this talk, and they're made by my friend Virginia Palchak. So if you like them, say hi to her on Twitter. The slides that are really boring are made by me. So thank you all for waking up early, and also thank you, Chet and Romain, for your speech yesterday. I pitched a similar one to a conference last year, but I decided it would be way too much work. So thank you for doing that for me, so I don't have to ever do it myself. So when I first began pitching this talk, it was back in September 2016. It was still warm and sunny in New York City, and we were grilling hot dogs outside. And the biggest thing we were worried about was exactly which pantsuit Hillary Clinton was going to pick for her inauguration speech. Now, of course, New York City is cold and dark and full of protesters, and my talk was supposed to be a joke about the guy who lost the election. And now it's a little more touchy. But I decided to go ahead with the theme anyway, because if there is a mobile platform that is of and for the people, it would be the first open source mobile platform, and that's Android. So 4 years ago, I interviewed at Google for the developer relations team. I did get the job, by the way. I worked there for a couple years, and I still like them all very much. They liked me, at least until I got on stage also. But one of the questions they asked in my interview was, why would you advise the CEO of a company to launch on Android first? I wanted the job a lot, so I came up with something to say. I said, flexible layouts. It makes it really easy to go from launching on an Android phone to an Android tablet. With iOS, you have to make separate apps for iPad and iPhone. Well, that's true. It is easier. But what I remember thinking at the time is that was basically a lie, because no one would have taken me seriously. At the time, it was very obvious. If you're in the United States and you are launching an app, you are going to launch on iOS first, always. I think I could only find one by searching the internet that launched on Android first, and it was the first startup I ever worked at where I made the iOS app, because the founder was an Android developer. So we were basically performing this mutual fantasy in this interview. One, that it was possible that it was going to happen, and two, that I was going to give someone this advice. But it's a great idea. I think it's sad that we don't launch on Android first. Sad, like a tweet, sad, with a exclamation point. And I thought this was all a big mistake. And that was why I wanted to join the team and help them, and we'd explain it, and we'd get this figured out. We'd turn the situation around. Well, about 2 months ago, I was reading the newspaper when WikiLeaks broke this big story on the CIA hacking into mobile devices. And they characterized the mobile market this way. Apple has only 15% of the global smartphone market versus Google's Android, the most widely used smartphone operating system. Well, it is, and that means, with a rounding error, that Android is about 85% of the market. That's enormous. That's crazy. When it first launched, nobody would have ever thought of that. The question is, why bother hacking the iPhone at all? So the New York Times article goes on to say, and the quote is from WikiLeaks, that the intensive CIA effort was probably explained by the popularity of the iPhone among social, political, diplomatic, and business elites. So I really love this phrase. When they talk about populism, they talk about the political movement. It's a movement of the people versus the elites. Well, those are the elites. So how did we get here? This weird place where there's one phone for elites or people who think they are, and one platform gets apps first, and then one phone for the rest of us. So it all started in 2007 when Steve Jobs stood up on stage with his black turtleneck and introduced a widescreen iPod with touch controls that was also a revolutionary mobile phone and a breakthrough internet communicator. This is a big day for me. It was the turning point of my career. I didn't know it then. I had dropped out of college, and I was serving drinks to people who were starting to come into my bar with iPhones. And I was fascinated. I would try and sneak peeks at their screen when they would check their email, So really nothing much has changed for me professionally. But it took a full year, 2008, till Google came back and we saw anything else on the market. And here it is. Thank you again for the awesome tour through this time yesterday on Android. So I think they joked about this, but they never came out and said it explicitly, maybe because they're still employed. So here it is. This phone is really funny looking. And there were a lot more funny looking phones to come. This is just a couple of them from these early years. It's kind of beautiful. So to this day, Apple has produced only 8 models of the iPhone, and they all look pretty much just like the first one, give or take. They didn't take a lot of risks in terms of design and form factor. That also meant users didn't get a lot of choice. At the same time, Android has positioned itself differently from the very start. It's been open source, and it's been customizable down to its bones for anyone who wants. And that means the Android narrative has been really different. Anyone has been able to make an Android phone and decide what they want it to look like Samsung, for example. On the other hand, some would say that's the fundamental strength of the Android platform. It can be all things to all people. The problem is that it hasn't necessarily been aspirational. That means it wasn't cool. So in my first full-time job after college, I agreed to switch from iOS development to Android development because they needed someone, and I knew Java. Believe it or not, I've made other life decisions on even less information, but I had no idea what I was getting into. And I very quickly became aware. And when you start looking for them, these little snubs or little insults are everywhere. You could call them Android microaggressions. So an example. Now, some of my best friends have iPhones. But as an example for everyone who's ever had an iPhone or knows anyone who does, is these green bubbles in the iMessage app. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't believe that Apple set this up on purpose to create an in-group and an out-group. But it's a really amazing example of how firmly people believe this. There are people who won't date you if you send green bubbles on their phone, or hang out with you. Or maybe they won't tell you to their face, but you don't quite measure up. How did that happen? It's a color. The first real personal blow for me was at a place called Equinox. Equinox is a really fancy chain of luxury gyms that I joined back when Google was paying for part of my membership. It's really great. I love that place. Just taking a shower there feels like going to the spa. Even working out there is almost fun. So at the time I joined, they only had an iOS app, but that happened. People usually, they launch first, later they have the Android app. It wasn't for lack of money, for sure. So I figured their Android app would be launching soon. But one day, I was booking a class on their website, and I noticed this. For those of you who are in the back who can't see the bottom of the screen, it says, download the app now. The one app, only one app. So that's when I realized they would never have an Android app. Not because they couldn't afford to, but because Equinox doesn't serve those people. They only serve the cool people, the beautiful people who are working out at Equinox. So naturally, in protest, I just quit the gym. Instagram is another, and maybe the most widely quoted example of why iOS first is the best way for a startup. Instagram obviously is a tremendous success story. It's the social media platform that makes you and your life look way more beautiful and exciting than they really are. So it launched on iOS, and it was acquired for $1 billion. That was the week that I was finally able to try it for the first time, because that's the week their Android app finally launched. The message being, we didn't even need to do this. The implication in the Instagram example is especially damaging, I think, that not only don't you need it to succeed, but you might be more popular if you started really exclusive, if you didn't let those other people in. Just launch on the cool platform. Later, when you have to, go ahead and let everyone else in. Get your app in the hands of these, beautiful people. Be exclusive. I don't like this. And the last example, if you just start Googling around for reasons to launch on one platform or another, an example is Coachella. It's a music festival in the US, full of beautiful people listening to beautiful music. It's full of these influencers, cool people, media celebrities. I may be bitter because I have never gone to Coachella, but it can't be harder than getting a ticket to Google I/O. Anyway, this is based on an interview by Robert Scoble where he's talking to the organizers of the Coachella app, and they say that 90% of the people who used their mobile apps were on iOS. Now, as a potential Coachella attendee, if I were considering using an Android app that looked like this and had a 2.9 rating on the Play Store, I wouldn't use it either. But that's just me. So I've been told that in Europe, the emphasis on iOS is slightly less, that iOS and Android are launching on more of an even footing here. Well, pardon my French, but that's still kind of bullshit. Europe has a 75% Android market share. Android should be going first. From what I've heard, it's only really in Asia where it's absolutely overwhelmingly Android that we're getting that first shot at things. Now, some developing nations are dominated by Android users purely because of low-cost phones, but that's definitely not the case for Europe or most of Asia. I'm sorry, I couldn't find a Europe vector because it's not like an individual country. So Japan loves the iPhone, there's still a majority there, but China and South Korea, for example, love Android. So there's no single factor that explains the relative popularity of mobile phones. The problem is, this battle of the platforms isn't a democracy, because if every mobile phone user cast a ballot when they picked their phone, 85% of them in the world have already chosen Android. Even in the US, somewhere between like 52 and 55, depending on where I look, percent of people are using Android. So unfortunately, it seems that we've won the popular vote, but lost the election. Seems to be a common situation. So it's a popularity contest. It's about who's cooler on the playground. And I'm convinced this really has no place in our tech policy today. So why should we launch on Android first? Is it better for the world? Yes, of course it is. I think it's obvious that it is. But we're not in the business of charity. Most of us aren't, anyway. So I'm going to share some business reasons today why I now believe that CEO from my interview should choose to launch his or her app on Android from the beginning. First of all, to share the cost of innovation. A lot of the cost of building a mobile app is simply figuring out what works. Sometimes it's not clear how to structure an API. Sometimes when your users try your app, the only features that they want are the ones you didn't think were important. So it's rare to get it right the first time in tech or in life, and the cost of mobile development includes that innovation. So the churn of innovation is one reason that a lot of people defend the iOS first approach. If it takes 75% of the time figuring out what you really want, and then 25% of the time to build your finished product, if you do it on two platforms at the same time, you'll duplicate that churn. If you wait till you've done it on one platform, however, it'll only take, say, an additional 25% of time to copy your finished product. On the other hand, if you always innovate and launch on one platform, I think you're doing it wrong, because you are wearing out the developers on your first platform by constantly changing the requirements. At the same time, you're boring those on the second platform to death, and that's not good. In both cases, you're running great developers into the ground for no reason. So instead, distribute the cost of innovation between platforms, and you can do this without losing efficiency by dividing on features. You can hire equal numbers of Android and iOS developers, Have them each write a different feature, and then tell the other one how they did it. I know this means we're going to have to talk to them, but it's okay. Make their teams work together closely, which is a good thing, I would argue, and share their learnings. It's good all around. It's the same investment, but without making one platform always wait last in line. Attracting talent. If I had $1 for every time someone in the United States came up to me and said, it's so much harder to hire great developers on Android, I'd have a pretty good income. So after all this time, I feel like the problem isn't the documentation. It's not the lack of tutorials. There are a lot of them. It's not the pipeline of Android developers. Google is really has been working hard to provide resources, the Google Developer Channel, the Udacity training courses. They came out with certifications. I'm not even getting paid to say this, although I do accept tips afterward. But I think, honestly, it's a bit of a bias against Android, which I obviously think is wrong. And I think developers can sense it. If the team you're hiring for is smaller, or just following in the footsteps of another team, you're going to be more reluctant to work at that company. Speaking from the audience here, which I can tell, you are all the best and brightest, even you. We've all made it through competitive tech schools, mobile boot camps. Some of us have taught ourselves. We want to go to a company that's going to continue supporting us with resources and the tools for success. So unless a company offers that, we might go somewhere else. We would go to a big company that's already conceded that Android is important, or we'll go to an Android consultancy, and then companies will have to pay twice as much to hire them to make their app. Or we might leave Android development altogether, and I pray for these poor people every day. So if you're struggling to hire, ask yourself, are you offering the chance to go first at your company? Are you giving your Android team the same opportunities, resources, and support? Because if you prioritize Android, we will come. There's also a common myth that it's harder to build on Android. So a lot of what is called device fragmentation, I think we should call screen diversity. Android devices have pioneered new form factors from the beginning. Everything from those sliding keyboards to Google Glass to the rise of the phablet. It started on Android. Having to make a design for a lot of different screen sizes is nothing new. We actually do it on the web every day, and that's normal. It's crazy to me that in mobile, it's now considered harder. So I say it's time to throw off these recycled iOS screens. We should be demanding quality, flexible layout designs to start with for Android devices of all shapes and sizes. That's not harder, it just makes sense. Sorry. But what about version fragmentation? I mean, we're all familiar with the iOS model. Just upgrade to the latest. On Android, most devices get platform updates more slowly. But these days, it's not such a big deal because core functionality like the support library, recycler view, constraint layout, I think it's now called the material design components, and all of the Google APIs are outside the platform. So we get these immediately on all levels. You really run into problems when someone doesn't understand and wants you to make everything the same on all Android devices, even when it shouldn't be. Like having your entire app look material on a device that's still running hollow. So that means a good Android app is the opposite of the iOS model. It's absolutely going to be different on different people's phones. That's a good thing, though. It's better to build a great app for 75 or 85% of your users than one that's just okay for everyone because you spent all that time backporting. People upgrade their phones. People finally do get platform upgrades. Your users over time are just going to come to newer platforms. So when you build for newer API levels, you build for all of your users. So why am I still talking about this? Because it's not a done deal. The struggle here isn't over. Lots of product managers and publicists don't agree with me. Why not? I'm right. But they have iPhones. So they're used to the iOS model, and it's hard to see beyond what you have. So since this is a political speech, I'm going to spin this. We need to reject the one-size-fits-all model, even if we have to push back. We need to be bold. We need to build new features optimistically to build for the future. So we need to go ahead and support the latest APIs as soon as we can for our newest users. If your app looks different on different phones, you need to teach people that that's OK. The only people who have more than one Android phone are us and our QA teams. So even we see a skewed version of the world. The good news is that today it's actually never been easier to justify a staggered or partial product launch. Because today there's iterative development, there's staged rollouts. Many companies are openly A/B testing in the wild, and they're confusing people. It's a new world out there. So trying to release an entire fully baked feature for any of your users on any platform is becoming a thing of the past quite quickly. So if you can explain why the Play Store launched a new feature 6 months ago, and only 5% of us can still see it, I think you can understand why 85% of your users are getting a new feature on launch day. Why Android first? Here's the big question. Oh. I'm doing this right. So will it make companies more money to launch on Android first? That's an important question, and it's probably the most important question because money makes the world go round. So I'm here to argue that yes, it will. And if that's so obvious, Lisa, why are tech companies, which love money, why are they still launching on iOS first? Well, I think it's very easy to look at data points and misread the conclusions. And it's also very easy to be swept up in the tide of your industry and follow the path. So, for example, you could look at the fact that women, I'll use them as an example, being that I am one, we currently earn 18% of computer science degrees, and we hold 26% of positions in tech. Tech hiring is supposed to be a merit-based process. So you could assume that means women simply aren't very good at doing computer science. Instead, our industry has been going crazy lately, realizing that human beings don't always make strictly logical decisions. We discriminate against people who don't look like us, who don't share our life experiences, maybe even against people who use different mobile platforms. We do this unconsciously, even. And even after being told these decisions will result in worse outcomes for us, we sometimes act against our own self-interest. I know, it's really weird. So I'm not the first person to stand up and say we should hire more women. But I may be the first person to stand up and say we should be launching first on Android, even though it's not common right now. There are two main reasons that I hear for focusing on iOS first rather than Android. And I'll address them one at a time. The first one is companies who say, we have a larger user base, we've already launched, and we have a larger user base on our iOS app than Android. So I'd like to talk about what happens when you launch on one platform first. A pretty common situation is our example app. It's launched, say, 4 years ago on iOS. It's doing quite well. It's got 4 million downloads and 1 million active users. So 2 years ago, based on their success, this example app launched on Android. So now they have 2 million downloads on Android and 500,000 active users. It doesn't suck, but obviously it doesn't compare. So their product team concludes they should continue launching new features exclusively on iOS, where they have the largest user base. And they hire additional engineers for iOS. They debut all their new features on that platform. And only later, if at all, do they get ported to Android. So here's a funny thing. Both of these graphs have exactly the same slope of installs and of adding extra active users. So imagine if this startup had launched on Android first. These positions would be exactly reversed. Well, but that wouldn't happen, you say. Well, it would. It looked right to you in the first scenario, but the second scenario is very, very rare, at least in the Western world. So a huge amount of mobile usage disparity, of difference, is driven just by the decision to keep launching iOS first. It's sort of a self-reinforcing belief. And the only way to break this cycle is if we start launching on Android first. The second one is that Android users don't have the money to be worth focusing on. I hate to put this trash on the screen, but if you Google for anything about iOS versus Android and the money you make, you see this kind of trash is a good word. So this is one of the more ridiculous claims. This author is kind of a troll who has several articles like this. All of them are pseudo-scientific, and they all rank highly in search results. Luckily, I read this one for you, so. But I picked this one because what he proves, this is true, is that there are more iPhone users in downtown New York City, and there are fewer in the nearby city, Newark, New Jersey, which doesn't have as high an average income. What he also misses is that the population of New York City is 8.4 million. And the population of Newark is 278,000. So of course, even if every person in Newark had an iPhone, there would still be like a factor of 100 fewer. So he's not proving anything except a headline. You know what though? Math is hard. This article is also one of the most commonly referred to think pieces about Android users and the fact that the average price point is lower than an iPhone. Honestly, this article is so mean-spirited and classist and even racist, it was hard to find part of it I could quote. I cropped this screenshot because the picture in it I found inappropriate. It's like they'll let anyone put things on the internet nowadays. But basically, Android phones are sold at many price points, both expensive and cheap. I mean, I assure you, my Pixel phone was not cheap. That happens because Android users have that choice. We can buy a cheap phone. We can buy an expensive one. We can do whatever we want. We have options. This author argues that devalues the whole brand and the whole platform. If you're willing to sell it cheaply or open source it for free, how could it possibly be good? So he's confusing price with value, and I think this is a really, really common thing in the industry. This response in The Atlantic, I think, really put a good point on it. The difference between Apple and Android isn't cheap versus quality. The distinction is cool versus popular. So we're still launching on cool. And we should be launching for all of our users. So finally, although it's hard to find exact data on private revenue, there is evidence that people with more expensive phones, both Android and iOS, tend to spend more money on apps, on in-app purchases, on shopping. I mean, it's not crazy to imagine that someone who spends a lot of money on their phone probably has a correlation with spending more money with that phone. So because of these statistics, and because there's a lower average price point for Android devices, I've had people claim to me, an average Android user is only worth 1/2 or 3/4 of an iOS user. I think the whole premise is kind of insulting, but you do have to talk about revenue at some point. What we do know is that there are 6 times as many Android users in the world. So even if an average one spends less, even if they spend 3/4 or 1/2 less, it's ludicrous to imagine that there isn't a huge amount of potential on this platform. Even in Europe, there are 3 times as many Android users. So the numbers are clear. Companies are just dragging their feet on a goldmine. So my question is, why are we still launching exclusively on a platform used by a fraction of users? Because other companies do it. Because influencers are on iOS. Because tech founders have iPhones, and so does everyone else they know. So guess who influencers and tech founders are? They are the social, political, diplomatic, and business elite. These people again. So these reasons are like hiring someone for culture fit. If you're not familiar with this, hiring someone because they fit your company's culture is a bad idea. You should hire them because they're good at their job. So it's also a bad reason, culture fit is a bad reason to choose a platform for launch. It's like saying, why hire men to be doctors? Well, most doctors right now are men. Why launch our app on iOS? Because iOS is the platform most apps are launching on. The more you try and defend this decision, and I find most people will try at first, at least initially, I think the shakier it becomes. So what I'm really advocating here is equality. Much like feminism is about women having equal rights, not about women ruling the world, although I don't think that's a bad idea. I'm really just advocating fairness in mobile. Android users are 85% of the mobile ecosystem, so I want Android to get the standing it deserves. We should be launching first, at least half the time. Saying Android apps don't make as much money per person is like pointing out that very few women rise to the highest corporate levels of tech. It's because they're not really getting a chance. Now, there are plenty of exemplary Android apps, and we've seen lots at this conference. But many of them are great because of passion, because of our great users and developers. They're kind of great despite this cruel world we live in sometimes. We're launching Android apps later. We're underfunding them. We're launching them with fewer features. Sometimes we're working from non-native designs. We're ignoring the purchase models that have chosen to be the most effective in 85% of the population in-app purchase because 15% prefers to purchase upfront. So of course, a lot of Android apps are struggling to make money. It's time for us to give them a real chance. So first of all, if you have a new startup, it's time to go Android first. Or launch a minimal product on both iOS and Android at the same time, and then alternate feature development. Translate your app. I probably don't need to tell people in Europe this, but for like the 5 Americans in this audience, the text inside your app, your title, your description, your update notes, all those little hints in the Play Store about internationalization, they are based on data. That's not a charity exercise. They are there to make your company money. It blows my mind that so many people simultaneously maintain their products don't make as much money on Android, and at the same time, they refuse to translate their apps. A huge percentage of Android users are from outside the US, so expecting a strictly English language Android app to succeed wildly without any kind of translation is kind of like launching an iOS app in just Russian. Although that might be popular in some places. But you need to prepare your app for internationalization from the beginning so that you can appeal to your full user base. Android's reach across the world is one of its greatest strengths. Other people will suggest the only reason to launch first on Android is if you can only launch on Android. And there are apps like this, utilities like custom launchers or embedded systems or custom tablets. These companies are awesome examples of what's possible on Android, but they're a tiny minority of use cases. So instead, I think we should focus on restoring true excellence and competitiveness in the Android apps we already have. So at conferences like this, you see many Android apps discussed that are already best in class. Great design, great implementation. But that's not the case everywhere. Many Android apps are widely used and deeply appreciated by their users, despite the fact they are made with fewer resources or they're missing features in their iOS counterparts. So think of the additional success those apps could achieve. And we should be launching new ones on at least an equal footing. The great news is that you are the most uniquely qualified at your company to know how your product could be better on Android. There's no need to be intimidated by that because you don't have to be a visionary to drive change. Something I've always enjoyed about Android, it's also sometimes made me want to kill people, is how involved and opinionated users are. So if you don't have an idea right now about how your app could be uniquely better on Android, I bet your users do. So in the meantime, if the next feature your mobile team is developing isn't platform specific, ask if your team can do it. Share in your company's innovation. If you keep hearing that they can't find you new senior Android experts, ask if you can mentor someone more junior. Grow your team that way. You don't just have knowledge, you also have influence. So push for Android to be funded equally in your companies, and allocated equivalent resources. Insist that your designers produce quality native designs, and insist that your developers only implement quality native designs. I think the tech world needs to recapture that energy and excitement and that momentum of reaching out to ordinary people across that greatest of divides, mobile platforms. It's better for users, it's better for your company, and most importantly, it's better for you. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks a lot. That was a great keynote.